Imagine a battlefield swallowed by darkness, the sky tearing open only when artillery blooms in the distance. Smoke curls across the ground like a living thing, and through it, a figure moves. Steady, unhurried, as if the war itself parts to let him pass. A whisper drifts through the chaos, low, shaken, almost reverent. The Germans called him the super soldier. Some said he was death's shadow. Cut to real wartime photographs. German officers leaning over maps, their faces tight, their hands hovering above reports they don't want to read. One points to a single name, circled, underlined, feared. Now the bunker, Hitler's command room. A general stands rigid, lips trembling as he delivers the message no dictator wants to hear. My Führer, the black ghost, is here. Hitler doesn't shout, doesn't blink. His expression just locks, the kind of freeze that tells you the threat is real. Silence drops like a hammer. Then the narrator cuts through it. He was the only Allied soldier Hitler personally warned his army to avoid. Not engage, not capture, avoid. Because every attempt ended the same way, with his men losing ground, losing morale, or losing their lives. Yet outside the battlefield, in the country he fought for, his name was never carved into monuments, never printed in textbooks, never lifted into the spotlight. Instead, it slipped into the shadows, edited out, misfiled, buried. And that leads to the question no nation likes to face. Why would the U.S. hide a hero the Nazis feared? A single gunshot breaks the quiet. The screen fades to black, holding the silence just long enough to make you wonder. Was the truth buried? Or was someone trying to bury him too? Picture this, a small southern town in the 1920s. The kind of place where the roads are dust, the air is heavy, and the rules are written on every wall. Whites only, colored entrance, signs that didn't just separate people, they defined their entire future. A young black boy stops outside a store he isn't allowed to walk into. He looks through the window, watching other kids browse freely. He stands still, but his eyes don't. They're tracking every detail, every movement, as if he's studying a world he plans to challenge. Before he terrified the Nazi regime, he wasn't allowed to sit at the same lunch counter in his own hometown. Cut to old photographs. Black families lined up outside worn-down schools. Men bent over in fields. Women carrying the weight of families in a country that refused to acknowledge their humanity. Jim Crow wasn't just a set of laws. It was a system engineered to break ambition before it ever formed. But this boy didn't bend. He ran through open fields barefoot, using the uneven ground to strengthen his balance. He lifted stones, logs, anything he could carry. While other kids played, he built himself. Not because he planned to become a soldier, but because he knew strength was the only thing in this world no one could take from him. Then the Great Depression struck. Factories shuttered. Bread lines stretched around blocks. Men who had worked their whole lives suddenly had nothing to offer their families except apologies. Riots, desperation, and hunger became part of everyday life. For most people, survival became the entire dream. For him, destiny was calling. He joined the U.S. Army, hoping for something simple: equality, respect, a chance to use his strength for something bigger than himself. What he found was the truth behind the uniform. Segregated barracks, broken down equipment handed off as good enough. Assignments so dangerous they were unofficially reserved for black soldiers because, as one officer said, they're more expendable. This wasn't a battlefield. It was the same old American hierarchy, wearing military colors. But something in him hardened, not into bitterness, into purpose. Every insult, every rejection, every door slammed in his face pushed him toward a single realization: if skill wouldn't earn him respect, impact would. And war, brutal, chaotic, unforgiving war, might be the only environment where a man could rewrite his worth through action alone. A spark lit inside him. A quiet fury sharpened into focus. He began to sense what no one around him could see. He wasn't meant to simply fight in this war. He was meant to reshape it. And as the world marched toward its bloodiest conflict, one question hung in the air. Not for him, but for the nation that underestimated him. When everything finally shattered, whose story would rise from the break? Picture this: a small southern town in the 1920s, the kind of place where the roads are dust, the air is heavy, and the rules are written on every wall. Whites only, colored entrance. Signs that didn't just separate people, they defined their entire future. A young black boy stops outside a store he isn't allowed to walk into. He looks through the window, watching other kids browse freely. He stands still, but his eyes don't. They're tracking every detail, every movement, as if he's studying a world he plans to challenge. Before he terrified the Nazi regime, he wasn't allowed to sit at the same lunch counter in his own hometown. Cut to old photographs. Black families lined up outside worn-down schools. Men bent over in fields. Women carrying the weight of families in a country that refused to acknowledge their humanity. Jim Crow wasn't just a set of laws. It was a system engineered to break ambition before it ever formed. But this boy didn't bend. He ran through open fields barefoot, using the uneven ground to strengthen his balance. He lifted stones, logs, anything he could carry. While other kids played, he built himself. Not because he planned to become a soldier, but because he knew strength was the only thing in this world no one could take from him. Then the Great Depression struck. Factories shuttered. Bread lines stretched around blocks. Men who had worked their whole lives suddenly had nothing to offer their families except apologies. Riots, desperation, and hunger became part of everyday life. For most people, survival became the entire dream. For him, destiny was calling. He joined the U.S. Army,
hoping for something simple: equality, respect, a chance to use his strength for something bigger than himself. What he found was the truth behind the uniform. Segregated barracks, broken down equipment handed off as good enough. Assignments so dangerous they were unofficially reserved for black soldiers because, as one officer said, they're more expendable. This wasn't a battlefield. It was the same old American hierarchy, wearing military colors. But something in him hardened, not into bitterness, into purpose. Every insult, every rejection, every door slammed in his face pushed him toward a single realization: if skill wouldn't earn him respect.
This wasn't American propaganda. This was the enemy warning their own men. His first missions prove why. Where other soldiers need full squads, he works alone. Where others wait for nightfall, he disappears into it. One operation becomes the moment his legend begins. 12 soldiers trapped behind enemy lines, pinned down, out of ammunition. Command writes them off. Impossible to reach without losing half a platoon. He goes anyway. He slips through a gap in the trees. One German patrol vanishes without making a sound. Another is found tied and gagged, weapons gone. By the time the sun rises, all 12 Americans are standing at the edge of camp, exhausted, stunned, alive. He doesn't brag about it. He doesn't celebrate. He just cleans his rifle and asks for the next assignment. A smart explanation line cuts in. Skill only explains half of it. The rest comes from someone who spent his entire life outrunning limits other people tried to impose. Then come the ambushes. Traps designed to kill entire squads. Roads rigged with explosives. Snipers hidden in church towers. He survives every one. Sometimes by inches. Sometimes because his reflexes don't match anyone else's. Sometimes, as soldiers later say, because he made choices no normal person would even see. A captured German officer finally puts the myth into words during interrogation. We thought he wasn't human. But myths don't grow without consequences. And legends don't rise without drawing the wrong kind of attention. So, as the Black Ghost's name spreads across enemy lines, one question tightens around him like a shadow. How long can a man climb this high before someone decides he shouldn't rise any further? Imagine a man earning respect on the battlefield faster than any official rank could grant. Yet the moment he steps back into his own camp, the air changes. The same officers who rely on his success in combat now avoid his eye. They talk quietly when he walks past, not with admiration, but with calculation. American commanders gather around desks littered with reports of his missions. They don't praise the rescues. They don't discuss the lives he's saved. Instead, they question how a black soldier could outperform the men they considered the backbone of the army. In a war where every advantage mattered, you'd expect them to elevate anyone who gave the Allies an edge. But they don't. They fear him. Not because of his strength, not because of his skill, but because his existence challenges a hierarchy they depend on. Jealousy comes first, the quiet kind.
A shift in tone, a tightened jaw when his name is mentioned. Officers uncomfortable with the idea that the most feared American soldier in Europe isn't one of them. Then comes the racism. Not whispered, not implied, but institutional. Meetings where white commanders argue that stories like his create the wrong expectations. Conversations where they label his accomplishments as luck, exaggeration, or isolated incidents. A smart explanatory beat. In segregated units, success from a black soldier wasn't just an achievement. It was a threat to a system built on the belief that he shouldn't be capable of it. When he requests medals for his men, he's told the paperwork was lost. When he asks for better boots because the ones issued to black units fall apart in the mud, he gets silence. When he pushes for equal pay, an officer laughs in his face, as if the question itself is an act of disrespect. He learns the truth. To them, bravery from black soldiers is acceptable only if it remains invisible. One night, he's called into a command tent. An officer delivers a simple warning, spoken without anger, almost like a reminder. Stay in your place. He understands exactly what it means. Don't rise too fast. Don't stand out. Don't make them question the order they've built. But he refuses. Not out of defiance, out of principle. He fights for his men the same way he fights the enemy, directly, without hesitation, without considering whether it makes others uncomfortable. A new tension enters the story. Once a soldier becomes inconvenient to his own commanders, every decision around him shifts. Missions change. Support thins. Praise becomes suspicion. And when a man is both brilliant and black in a segregated army, his successes aren't just minimized. They're examined for ways to be controlled. Then come the pile-ups. Requests pile up and denials grow colder. A line is crossed. Officers stop treating him as an asset and start treating him as a problem. A problem that needs managing. A problem that cannot grow larger. He can sense it. In the way conversations stop when he enters a room. In the way orders start coming with unusual urgency. In the way his superiors no longer mention his name unless it's connected to something dangerous. And that's when the question shifts from why they resisted him to how far they're willing to go. Because as the war intensifies and his legend continues to spread across enemy lines, something else begins behind him. Quiet, deliberate, coordinated. And that's when they began planning his downfall.
Imagine being handed an assignment that feels wrong the moment you hear it. A mission with no map, no backup, and no chance anyone will come looking if things go south. He knew the pattern by now. When the army wanted a job done, they sent a team. When they wanted a problem removed quietly, they sent one man. He moves into enemy territory anyway, not because he trusts the order, but because leaving his fellow soldiers exposed would betray everything he stands for. The forest grows silent as he advances, too silent for a war zone. He senses it before he sees it, the shift in the air, the tension in the trees. Then the attack hits. Gunfire erupts from every direction. The ground explodes at his feet. Dozens of Nazi soldiers swarm the clearing. It's not a skirmish, it's a trap. He fights with everything he has, but numbers win. A shot tears into his leg. Another grazes his shoulder. Within minutes, he's on the ground, surrounded, weapon kicked away. No rescue team arrives. No radio call checks in. This isn't a mission gone bad. This is a setup. The Nazis drag him into a transport truck, chains around his wrists. They know exactly who they've captured. They've been hunting him for months. In the interrogation room, they try to break him fast. Violence first, threats second. But something unexpected happens. The guards begin whispering to each other, stealing glances at the door, speaking his title like a warning. He's the one Hitler hates, the Black Ghost. A smart explanatory note. His legend had grown so large that even his captors feared the consequences of killing or mishandling him. But fear doesn't stop them from trying. They starve him. They beat him. They isolate him for days at a time. They cycle through psychological torture designed to crush identity. 2 years pass like this. 2 years in a system engineered to erase men from existence. But he never breaks. He never reveals troop positions. He never gives names. He never stops being the one thing the Nazis can't understand: unbroken. What's harder to swallow is what's happening on the other side of the wire. The United States files no urgent requests. No rescue operations are discussed. No officers push for prisoner exchanges. A quiet truth forms. The Nazis wanted to break him. America wanted to forget him. He keeps himself alive with one thought: that surviving might be the only form of resistance he has left. But as the months drag on and the camp grows colder, another question begins to rise, one darker than anything his captors inflict. Was this the moment his story would die behind barbed wire? Imagine a prison camp built to crush whatever was left of a man. Rusted fences, watchtowers cutting the sky, the kind of place where hope doesn't survive more than a day. And then, one morning, the sirens begin to howl, long, rising wails that even the guards fear. Allied forces are closing in. The ground shakes as artillery hits somewhere beyond the walls. Smoke pushes through the compound. Orders are shouted. Prisoners scatter, not sure whether to run or drop flat. Guards fire blindly into the chaos. No one knows what's happening except him. He forces himself up from the dirt, body barely holding together after years inside this cage. His leg refuses to straighten. His arm refuses to lift. But he moves anyway, dragging himself toward the others. He knows the pattern of escape better than the guards know their own towers. He calls out to the prisoners, nearly voiceless but firm. He directs them toward the breach forming along the eastern fence. They don't question him. They follow without looking back. Because for 2 years this man has survived what should have ended him. And when a man like that says run, you run.
Machine guns open from the towers. Dirt explodes around their feet. Prisoners fall. More run. The fence rattles as the first group reaches it. He stays behind them, covering their backs with a rifle he pulled off a stunned guard moments earlier. A smart explanatory line. In war, leadership isn't given by rank. It's earned by the people survivors trust in their darkest moment. He plants himself beside a shattered wall, steady even with blood running down his leg. He fires with precision that shouldn't be possible after everything done to him. One guard drops, then another. He holds an entire flank alone, buying seconds that feel lifetimes. Later, a soldier who saw it tries to explain the impossible. I saw him standing there, blood pouring down his leg, firing back at an entire unit. He wasn't fighting for a medal. He was fighting for every man who'd been forgotten. The chaos around him blurs, and for a moment, something else flashes through his mind. The storefront he couldn't enter as a child. The lunch counter that turned him away. The officer who told him to stay in your place. Every insult that taught him the world believed he was less.
The battlefield goes silent for a beat, not because the gunfire stops, but because something inside him resolves. This isn't a fight against Nazis anymore. It's a fight against the idea that he was never meant to be more than a footnote. He pushes forward one last time, one last burst of strength, one last refusal to be erased. And then his body gives out. He collapses at the exact moment Allied troops break through the gates. Soldiers rush toward him. Boots hit the ground beside his head. A voice shouts over the noise, grabbing his shoulder. "We got you! You're going home!" Then, quiet. Real, heavy quiet. When he wakes up weeks later, he believes the nightmare is finally over. He imagines parades, recognition, the truth finally told. But the country he fought for doesn't see him the way the enemy did. There are no ceremonies, no newspaper stories, no medals waiting on his bed. White soldiers are celebrated. His name is missing. Reports are edited. Files accidentally misplaced. Hitler knew his name. America pretended it didn't. Years pass. He slips into poverty. His war record becomes a rumor. A few veterans remember the Black Ghost. A few Nazis fear the memory of him. But history moves on without speaking his name. And when he's finally buried, the grave is small, quiet, almost anonymous. A man the world should have honored is left with a marker that barely tells a story. History kept the darkness, but erased the light. And that leaves one question hanging over the nation he fought to defend. If a country forgets its bravest, what does it remember? Decades later, something shifts. Documents are unsealed. Historians re-examine the files that survived. Modern soldiers salute the heroes who slipped through the cracks. And slowly, his name returns. He didn't just change the war. He changed what we know courage looks like. And maybe
It's time the world finally remembers the man even Hitler feared.